Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she carried another heavy tray of dirty dishes to the kitchen. Her feet hurt badly. She had been working for 12 hours straight at Romano's restaurant. This was her third double shift this week. The black shoes she wore were old and worn out. They made her feet ache with every step she took across the marble floor. Romano's was not like other restaurants. It was fancy and expensive. Rich people came here to eat dinner and talk about business. The walls were covered with beautiful paintings. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling. White tablecloths covered every table. The chairs were made of soft leather. Everything in the restaurant cost a lot of money. Sarah was 24 years old. She had long black hair that she always kept tied back in a neat ponytail. Her brown eyes were tired but kind. She always smiled at customers even when they were rude to her. She wore a simple black dress with a white apron. This was the uniform all servers had to wear at Romano's. 3 months ago, Sarah's life was very different. She was a music student at the local college. She loved playing piano more than anything else in the world. Music was her passion. She dreamed of becoming a professional pianist one day. She wanted to play in big concert halls, where hundreds of people would come to listen to her music, but then everything changed. Sarah's mother got very sick. The doctor said she needed expensive treatments to get better. The treatments cost thousands of dollars. Sarah's family did not have that much money. Her father had died when she was 16. It was just Sarah and her mother now. Sarah had to make a choice. She could keep going to college and follow her dreams, or she could get a job to help pay for her mother's medical bills. It was not really a choice at all. She loved her mother more than anything. She dropped out of college and found a job at Romano's restaurant. Every day, Sarah worked hard to earn money. She served food to rich customers who never looked at her as a real person. To them, she was just someone who brought their food and filled their wine glasses. They did not know that she had dreams. They did not know that she missed playing piano every single day. The worst part of working at Romano's was the piano. Right. In the center of the dining room sat a beautiful black grand piano. It was the most gorgeous instrument Sarah had ever seen. The piano was shiny and perfect. Sometimes, when the restaurant was quiet, Sarah would stare at it and remember how it felt to play music. The piano at Romano's was just for decoration. No one ever played it. Rich customers would sometimes ask about it, and the manager would explain that it was there to make the restaurant look more elegant. Sarah thought this was very sad. A piano was meant to be played, not just looked at, during her breaks. Sarah would sometimes walk over to the piano when no one was watching. She would gently touch the keys, but never press them down. She was afraid someone would hear and tell her to stop. She was just a server. She was not supposed to touch the expensive things in the restaurant. Sarah lived in a small apartment with her mother. Every morning, she would wake up early and check on her mother before going to work. Her mother was getting weaker every day. The medicine helped a little, but she needed better treatment. The doctors said there was a new treatment that could help her get better, but it was very expensive. At night, after working long shifts at the restaurant, Sarah would sit by her mother's bed and tell her about her day. She would talk about the customers she served and the food she carried, but she never talked about the piano. It hurt too much to think about it. Sarah's mother knew how much her daughter missed music. Before she got sick, she used to love listening to Sarah play piano. Sarah had an old keyboard in her bedroom, but she rarely played it anymore. She was too tired after work, and it made her sad to remember what she had given up. The other servers at Romano's were nice to Sarah, but they did not understand her situation. Most of them were working at the restaurant temporarily while they went to school or looked for better jobs. Sarah felt stuck. She could not quit because her mother needed the money for her treatments. But every day she worked there, she felt further away from her dreams. Romano's had many regular customers. Some were kind and polite. They would say please and thank you when Sarah served them, but others were not nice at all. They would snap their fingers at her like she was a dog. They would complain about everything and blame her for things that were not her fault. The restaurant was always busy on Friday nights. Rich people would come for expensive dinners before going to shows or parties. They would order the most expensive wine and eat meals that cost more than Sarah made in a day. Sometimes Sarah felt angry about this, but she tried not to think about it too much. Sarah's manager was a man named Tony. He was usually fair to his workers, but he cared more about making the customers happy than protecting his staff. If a customer complained about a server, Tony would always take the customer's side. This made Sarah nervous. She needed this job and could not afford to lose it. On busy nights like this Friday, Sarah would work until very late. By the time she got home, her mother would already be asleep. Sarah would eat a quick dinner alone and then fall into bed, exhausted. She would do the same thing again the next day. Sometimes Sarah wondered if her life would always be like this. Would she spend the rest of her life serving food to rich people who did not care about her? Would she ever get to play piano again? Would her mother ever get better? But Sarah was not the type of person to give up easily. Even though her life was hard now, she still had hope. She believed that someday things would get better. She just had to keep working and saving money. Maybe someday she could go back to school. Maybe someday she could play piano in front of people who actually wanted to listen. As Sarah carried another tray of food across the dining room, she glanced at the beautiful piano one more time. She did not know that this Friday night would be different from all the others. She did not know that in just a few hours, everything in her life would change. The piano that had been silent for so long was about to sing again, and Sarah would be the one to make it happen. The dining room at Romano's was packed with people on this Friday night. Every table was full. Sarah moved quickly between the tables, carrying plates and filling water glasses. Her feet hurt even more now, but she kept working. She needed the tip money from tonight to help pay for her mother's medicine. At table 12 sat a man who had been giving Sarah trouble all evening. His name was Marcus Wellington III. He was about 50 years old with gray hair and expensive clothes. His suit probably cost more money than Sarah made in 3 months. He wore a gold watch that sparkled under the restaurant lights. Marcus was very rich and very used to getting everything he wanted. Marcus had arrived at Romano's an hour ago with 3 other businessmen. From the moment he sat down, he had been difficult. First, he complained that his table was too close to the kitchen. Sarah had to ask Tony, the manager, to move them to a different table. This made Tony annoyed because the restaurant was very busy. Then Marcus complained about the wine. He ordered a bottle that cost $200. When Sarah brought it to the table, Marcus tasted it and made a disgusted face. He said the wine was too warm and demanded a different bottle. Sarah apologized and brought him a new bottle. This one was too cold, according to Marcus. Sarah had to ask the bartender to let the wine sit for 10 minutes before serving it again. After the wine problem, Marcus found fault with everything else. The bread was too hard. The salad dressing was too thick. The music was too loud. Sarah fixed each problem with a smile, but inside she felt frustrated. She had other tables to serve, but Marcus kept demanding her attention. The other men at Marcus's table seemed embarrassed by his behavior. They would apologize to Sarah quietly when Marcus was not looking. One of them even whispered that they were sorry for their friend's rudeness. Sarah appreciated this, but it did not make serving Marcus any easier. Sarah noticed that Marcus liked to show off. He talked loudly about his expensive car and his big house. He mentioned how much money he had made in his latest business deal. He wanted everyone in the restaurant to hear how important and wealthy he was. The other customers tried to ignore him, but his voice carried across the dining room. When Sarah brought the main course to Marcus's table, he found another reason to complain. The steak was not cooked exactly the way he wanted it. He sent it back to the kitchen, even though it looked perfectly fine to Sarah. The chef had to cook a new steak, which took 20 more minutes. This made Marcus even more angry. While they waited for the new steak, Marcus started looking around the restaurant. His eyes landed on the beautiful black piano in the center of the dining room. He pointed at it and spoke loudly to his business partners. "Look at that piano," Marcus said. "I bet it is just for show. These fancy restaurants always have pianos that nobody can actually play. It is all about looking rich and cultured." Sarah was refilling water glasses at a nearby table when she heard this. She glanced over at the piano, as she had done hundreds of times before. But this time was different. This time, someone was talking about her beloved instrument. Marcus continued talking about the piano. I bet you could ask anyone in this restaurant to play that thing and they would not know how. Especially the workers. They probably do not even know what the keys are for. Sarah felt her cheeks get hot with anger. She tried to focus on her work, but Marcus's words bothered her. How could he assume that working people did not know about music? How could he think that only rich people understood culture and art? The new steak finally arrived at Marcus's table. Sarah served it carefully, hoping there would be no more complaints, but Marcus was still in a bad mood. He cut a piece of the steak and tasted it slowly. Sarah held her breath, waiting for his reaction. "This is better," Marcus said finally. "But it took way too long. This kind of service is unacceptable in a restaurant like this." Sarah apologized again, even though the delay was not her fault. Marcus had sent back the first steak for no good reason, but she knew better than to argue. With a customer, she needed this job too much to risk getting in trouble. As Sarah turned to leave the table, Marcus called her back. "Wait a minute," he said loudly. "I want to ask you something." Sarah stopped and turned around. "Yes, sir? How can I help you?" Marcus smiled, but it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who thought he was smarter than everyone else. "I have been watching you all night," he said. "You keep looking at that piano over there. Do you know how to play it?" Sarah felt surprised by the question. She looked around and noticed that other customers were starting to listen to their conversation. She felt nervous with so many people watching her. I used to study music," Sarah said quietly. She did not want to make a big deal about it. Marcus laughed loudly. "You studied music? Where, at some community college?" He turned to his friends and continued laughing. "This is perfect. A waitress who thinks she is a musician." Sarah felt her face turn red with embarrassment and anger. She wanted to walk away. But Marcus was not finished with her yet. "Tell you what," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. "I will make you a deal. A little bet if you are interested." "I should get back to work," Sarah said. She could see that Tony was watching from across the room. He did not like it when servers spent too much time talking to customers instead of working. "Just hear me out," Marcus said. His voice was getting louder, and more people were turning to look. "I bet you cannot play that piano. I bet you cannot play even the simplest song. What do you say we make this interesting?" Sarah looked around. The dining room. She could see other servers stopping their work to listen. Some customers had put down their forks and were paying attention to what was happening. Even Tony was walking over to see what the commotion was about. "What kind of bet?" Sarah asked, even though she knew she should just walk away. Marcus grinned widely. "If you can play something decent on that piano, something that actually sounds like music, I will give you a $500 tip." $500? Cash, right now. Sarah's heart started beating faster. $500 was more than she made in 2 weeks. That money could pay for her mother's medicine for a whole month, but she knew there had to be a catch. "And, if I cannot play?" Sarah asked. "If you cannot play, if you embarrass yourself up there, then you pay for my entire dinner tonight. All 4 meals, plus the wine. I think the bill will be about $300. Sarah felt sick to her stomach. $300 was almost all the money she had saved for her mother's treatment. She could not afford to lose that much money. But $500 would help her mother so much. Tony finally reached their table. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, looking worried. "Everything is fine," Marcus said. "I was just making a friendly bet with your server here. She says she can play piano. I say she cannot. We were just having some fun." Tony looked at Sarah with concern. He knew that getting involved in bets with customers was not a good idea. But he also knew that Marcus was an important customer who spent a lot of money at the restaurant. Sarah stood there, thinking about her options. She looked at the piano, then at Marcus, then at all the people who were watching and waiting for her answer. Her whole future seemed to depend on what she said next. Sarah stood frozen at Marcus's table, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The entire restaurant seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for her answer. She looked around at all the faces staring at her. Some looked curious. Others looked worried, and a few looked like they were enjoying the drama. Tony, the manager, put his hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Sarah, you don't have to do this," he whispered. "Just go back to work. I will handle this customer." But Sarah was thinking about her mother lying in bed at home, getting weaker every day. She was thinking about the medical bills that kept piling up on their kitchen table. She was thinking about the expensive treatment that could help her mother get better. $500 would pay for so much. Sarah also thought about the piano. For 3 months, she had walked past it every day, remembering how much she missed playing music. She remembered the feeling of her fingers on the keys, the way music could express things that words never could. She remembered why she had loved playing piano so much. "I will take the bet," Sarah said quietly. Marcus clapped his hands together loudly. "Excellent, this is going to be entertaining." He turned to the other customers nearby. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to have a show. This young lady thinks she can play piano." Tony looked very worried. "Sarah, are you sure about this?" "Maybe we should just, I'm sure," Sarah interrupted. She looked directly at Marcus. "But I want to make sure everyone understands the bet. If I play something good, you give me $500. If I cannot play well, I pay for your dinner. Is that right?" "That is exactly right," Marcus said. "And everyone here is a witness." He gestured to the other customers, who were now all watching their conversation. Word about the bet spread quickly through the restaurant. Servers stopped what they were doing and gathered around the edges of the dining room. Customers at other tables turned their chairs to get a better view. Even the cooks came out of the kitchen to see what was happening. Sarah walked slowly toward the piano in the center of the room. Each step felt heavy and difficult. Her hands were shaking and her mouth felt dry. She had not played piano in months. What if she had forgotten how? What if her fingers did not remember the music? What if she embarrassed herself in front of all these people? The piano was even more beautiful up close. The black surface was so shiny that Sarah could see her reflection in it. The keys were perfect white and black, just waiting for someone to bring them to life. Sarah gently lifted the lid that covered the keys. It made a soft sound as it opened. "Take your time," Marcus called out from his table. "We are all waiting to be amazed." His voice was full of sarcasm. He clearly did not believe that Sarah could really play. Sarah sat down on the piano bench and adjusted it to the right height. The bench was soft and comfortable, much nicer than the old chair she used to practice on at home. She placed her hands gently on the keys without pressing them down. The keys felt cool and smooth under her fingers. The restaurant was completely quiet now. No one was talking. No one was eating. Even the background music had been turned off. Everyone was watching Sarah and waiting to hear what would happen. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She tried to calm her nerves and remember why she was doing this. This was not just about money, although the money was important. This was about proving that she was more than just a waitress. This was about showing that working people could have dreams and talents too. She thought about her mother, who had always believed in her music. She thought about her father, who had bought her first piano lesson when she was 7 years old. She thought about all the hours she had spent practicing, all the songs she had learned, all the joy that music had brought to her life. Sarah opened her eyes and looked down at the keys. Her hands were still shaking, but she felt a little calmer now. She knew what she wanted to play. She would start with something simple and beautiful, something that would touch people's hearts. She decided to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was one of her favorite pieces, and she had played it many times before. The melody was gentle and sad, but also hopeful. It reminded Sarah of her own life, difficult and painful, but still beautiful. Sarah pressed the first key very softly. The sound that came from the piano was pure and clear. It filled the entire restaurant with its beauty. She pressed the next key, and then the next. Slowly, carefully, she began to play the opening notes of the Nocturne. At first, her fingers felt stiff and uncertain. It had been so long since she had played. But as the melody continued, something magical happened. Her fingers began to remember. The music began to flow naturally from her hands to the keys. The beautiful sound filled the restaurant like water filling an empty container. Sarah forgot about Marcus and his bet. She forgot about the people watching her. She forgot about her tired feet and her long day at work. All she could think about was the music. She was finally home again in the place where she belonged. The melody of the nocturne was soft and dreamy. It spoke of quiet nights and peaceful thoughts. But underneath the gentleness, there was also a deep sadness. The music seemed to tell the story of someone who had lost something precious and was remembering it with love and pain. As Sarah played, she felt tears coming to her eyes. She had missed this so much. Music was not just something she did, it was part of who she was. For 3 months, she had been trying to live without this part of herself. Now she remembered how empty she had felt without it, the other people in the restaurant began to understand that they were hearing something special. This was not just someone playing piano, this was a real musician sharing her heart through music. The sound was professional and beautiful, filled with emotion and skill. Marcus stopped smiling. He sat up straighter in his chair and listened more carefully. This was not what he had expected. He had thought Sarah would embarrass herself, maybe play a simple tune with one finger. He had not expected to hear real music, played with such skill and feeling. Tony watched from the side of the room with his mouth open. He had known Sarah for 3 months, but he had never known she could do this. He felt bad for not taking better care of such a talented person who worked for him. The other servers looked amazed. They had worked alongside Sarah every day, but they had never known about her hidden talent. They felt proud of their friend and angry at customers who had treated her badly without knowing who she really was. As the nocturne continued, more people began to understand what they were witnessing. This was not just a bet or entertainment. This was a young woman sharing her soul through music, showing everyone that she was much more than they had thought. The beautiful melody seemed to transform the entire restaurant, turning it from a place of business into a place of art and beauty. As Sarah finished the gentle opening of Chopin's Nocturne, something wonderful happened inside her. The nervousness that had made her hands shake was gone. The fear of embarrassing herself had disappeared. She felt like herself again for the first time in months. Her fingers moved across the keys with confidence and grace, as if no time had passed since her last performance. The nocturne flowed through the restaurant. Like a gentle river, each note was clear and perfect. Sarah's technique was flawless. But more than that, her playing was full of emotion. Every person listening could feel the sadness and beauty in the music. Some people had tears in their eyes, though they did not fully understand why. When the nocturne came to its soft, peaceful ending, Sarah did not stop playing. She had found her home again at the piano, and she was not ready to leave. Without pause, she began to transition into something completely different. The classical elegance of Chopin melted into the smooth, sophisticated sounds of jazz. Sarah began playing The Way You Look Tonight, one of the most beautiful love songs ever written. But this was not the simple version that most people knew. Sarah played it with complex jazz harmonies and rhythms that showed her deep understanding of music. Her left hand played a walking bass line while her right hand danced through the melody. With improvised decorations, the change in musical style amazed everyone in the restaurant. It was one thing to play classical music well. Many people could do that with enough practice. But jazz was different. Jazz required creativity and musical intelligence. You had to understand music deeply to play jazz the way Sarah was playing. Marcus sat in his chair with his mouth open. He had stopped eating completely and was staring at Sarah with disbelief. This was not possible. How could a waitress play piano like this? She was playing better than the professional musicians he had heard at expensive concerts. His arrogant smile was completely gone now. The jazz version of The Way You Look Tonight was romantic and sophisticated. Sarah played it with the skill of someone who had studied music seriously for many years. Her fingers knew exactly where to go, and her timing was perfect. She added her own personal touches to the melody, making it fresh and new while still keeping the song's beautiful essence. Tony watched from the corner of the dining room, feeling shocked and a little guilty. How had he not known that one of his employees was this talented? He had been treating Sarah like just another server, never imagining that she was a trained musician. He began to understand that he had been wasting her abilities by having her carry plates when she could create such beauty. The other servers gathered closer to listen. Maria, who worked the morning shift with Sarah, had tears running down her cheeks. She whispered to the server next to her, "I had no idea. We worked together every day, and I never knew she could do this." Even the customers who had been rude to Sarah earlier in the evening felt ashamed of themselves. They realized they had been treating a real artist like she was nothing special. The woman they had ignored or spoken to rudely was creating music that moved their hearts and souls. As Sarah played the jazz standard, she began to feel more adventurous. The music was flowing through her so naturally that she decided to take a risk. She started to improvise, creating new melodies on top of the familiar song. Her improvisation was sophisticated and beautiful, showing that she understood music well enough to create new beauty on the spot. The improvisation section was where Sarah's talent really shone. This was not something she had memorized or practiced. This was pure musical creativity happening in real time. Her fingers found notes and combinations that surprised even herself. The music seemed to be coming from somewhere deep inside her soul. Some of the customers were musicians themselves, or at least people who understood music well. They recognized what they were hearing. This was not just someone who had taken a few piano lessons. This was a seriously trained musician with natural talent and years of study. Behind her, an older woman at table 6 leaned over to her husband and whispered, "She plays like a professional. Better than some professionals I have heard. Where did she study? How did she end up working as a waitress?" Her husband nodded in agreement. "There must be a story here. People with this much talent do not usually end up serving tables unless something difficult happened in their lives." Sarah brought the jazz section to a smooth conclusion, but she was still not ready to stop. The music was healing something inside her that had been broken for months. She had been living without the thing she loved most, and now she remembered how much it meant to her. For her final piece, Sarah decided to play something very personal. She began a song that no one in the restaurant had ever heard before because she had written it herself. It was a composition she had created for her father before he died, a musical letter telling him how much she loved and missed him. The original composition was the most beautiful music of the entire performance. It combined classical structure with jazz harmonies and Sarah's own unique musical voice. The melody was sad but hopeful, speaking of love that continues even after loss. It told the story of a daughter's love for her father and her determination to honor his memory by pursuing her dreams. As Sarah played her original composition, she thought about her father. He had been the one who first noticed her musical talent when she was a little girl. He had worked extra hours to pay for her piano lessons. He had sat in the audience at her school recitals, beaming with pride. He had believed in her dream of becoming a professional musician. The music grew more intense and emotional as Sarah poured all of her feelings into it. She played about the sadness of losing her father, the difficulty of caring for her sick mother, the pain of giving up her dreams, and the hope that somehow things would get better. Every note carried deep emotion that touched the hearts of everyone listening. People throughout the restaurant were crying now, not just because the music was beautiful, but because they could feel Sarah's story in every note. They understood that this was not just a performance. It was a young woman sharing her life through music, telling them about love and loss and dreams that had been put aside. The composition built to a powerful climax, where Sarah played with passion and strength, showing that despite all her difficulties, her spirit was not broken. Then it settled into a gentle, peaceful ending that spoke of acceptance and hope for the future. When the last note faded into silence, The restaurant remained completely quiet for a long moment. No one wanted to break the spell that Sarah's music had created. It was as if everyone needed time to process what they had just experienced. They had come to Romano's for dinner, but they had received something much more precious. They had witnessed true artistry and been touched by authentic, human emotion expressed through music. The silence in Romano's restaurant stretched for what felt like forever. Sarah sat at the piano with her hands still resting on the keys, breathing heavily from the emotional intensity of her performance. She had poured her entire heart into the music, and now she felt both exhausted and strangely peaceful. For the first time in months, she felt like herself again. Then the silence broke. One person started clapping, then another, and suddenly the entire restaurant erupted in thunderous applause. People stood up from their tables, clapping and cheering with genuine enthusiasm. Some wiped tears from their eyes as they applauded. Others shook their heads in amazement, unable to believe what they had just heard. Sarah turned around on the piano bench, surprised by the overwhelming response. She had been so lost in the music that she had almost forgotten about the audience. Now she saw dozens of faces looking at her with respect, admiration, and even awe. These were the same people who had barely noticed her when she was serving their food. Now they were looking at her like she was someone special. Marcus Wellington III sat at his table, completely stunned. His face had gone pale, and his arrogant expression had been replaced by shock and shame. He stared at Sarah as if he was seeing her for the first time. The bet that had seemed so easy and amusing to him now felt cruel and foolish. He had expected to embarrass a simple waitress, but instead he had been shown that his assumptions about people were completely wrong. Tony, the restaurant manager, pushed through the crowd to reach Sarah. His eyes were wide with amazement and concern. "Sarah," he said, his voice full of emotion, "I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me you could play like this? You are incredible." Sarah stood up from the piano bench, her legs feeling shaky. She was overwhelmed by all the attention. I needed the job," she said quietly. "I didn't think it mattered that I used to study music." "Used to study?" Tony repeated. "Sarah, you play like a professional. Where did you train?" "What happened? Why are you working here instead of performing?" Before Sarah could answer, Marcus slowly stood up from his table. The restaurant grew quiet again as everyone watched him walk towards Sarah and the piano. His three business partners looked embarrassed and stayed seated, not wanting to be associated with what their friend had done. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. His hands were trembling slightly as he counted out $500 in cash. He held the money out to Sarah, but he could not look her in the eyes. "I was wrong," Marcus said in a voice that was much quieter than his usual boastful tone. "I owe you this money, and I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about you that were completely unfair. I am sorry." Sarah looked at the money in Marcus's hand. $500. It was more money than she had ever held at one time. This money could pay for her mother's medicine for weeks. But looking at Marcus now, she felt more sad than angry. He seemed like a different person than the arrogant man who had made the bet. "Thank you," Sarah said, taking the money. "But I want you to know that I did not play for the money. I played because music is part of who I am." Marcus nodded, still looking ashamed. "I understand that now. I was wrong about you, and I was wrong about a lot of things." As Marcus walked back to his table, other customers began approaching Sarah. A woman in an elegant dress came forward first. "My dear," the woman said, "that was absolutely beautiful. I am Jennifer Walsh. I work for the City Symphony Orchestra. We are always looking for talented musicians. Do you have any formal training?" Sarah felt overwhelmed by the question. "I was studying music at the community college, but I had to stop to work and help my family." Jennifer nodded with understanding. "Life can be difficult sometimes. But talent like yours should not be wasted. Here is my business card. Please call me next week. We might have opportunities for someone with your abilities." Before Sarah could respond, another person stepped forward. This was a man in an expensive suit who looked like he might work in the music business. "Excuse me," the man said. "I am David Chun. I produce music for films and television. That original composition you played was extraordinary. Did you really write that yourself?" "Yes," Sarah said, feeling embarrassed by all the attention. "I wrote it for my father before he passed away." David's eyes lit up. It was beautiful and very professional. "I would love to hear more of your original music. We are always looking for composers who can write emotional, meaningful music. Would you be interested in discussing some possible projects?" Sarah felt dizzy. This was all happening so fast. An hour ago, she had been worried about paying her mother's medical bills. Now people were talking to her about music careers and professional opportunities. More customers approached with business cards and offers. A music teacher wanted to give her free lessons to help her finish her education. A wedding planner wanted to hire her to play at events. A recording studio owner offered to let her record some of her original compositions. Tony watched all of this with growing excitement and concern. He realized that he was probably going to lose one of his best employees, but he also felt happy. For Sarah, he made a decision. "Sarah," Tony said, pulling her aside, "I want to offer you something. Would you be interested in playing piano here at Romano's on weekends? We could hire you as our official pianist. The pay would be much better than serving tables, and you could still work here while you pursue other opportunities." Sarah felt tears coming to her eyes. Everything was changing so quickly. Just this morning, her biggest worry had been whether she would make enough tips to buy her mother's medicine. Now she had multiple job offers and more opportunities than she could process. But the most amazing thing happened when Jennifer Walsh, the woman from the symphony orchestra, approached her again. "Sarah," Jennifer said, "I have been thinking about your situation. You mentioned that you had to leave school to work and help your family. The symphony has a scholarship program for talented musicians in difficult circumstances. Would you be interested in applying? It could cover your tuition and provide a living allowance while you finish your degree." Sarah felt like she might faint. A scholarship? The chance to go back to school and study music? This was beyond her wildest dreams. The evening continued with more people offering help and opportunities. Several customers started a collection to help with Sarah's mother's medical bills. Within an hour, they had raised over $2,000. A local newspaper reporter who had been dining at Romano's wanted to write a story about Sarah. A music school director offered her a full scholarship. As the restaurant began to close, Sarah sat at the piano one more time, but now she was not alone. Several other customers had stayed late just to talk with her about music. Tony had turned off most of the lights, but he left the piano light on so Sarah could see the keys. Sarah played one final song, a simple but beautiful melody that expressed her gratitude for everything that had happened. As she played, she thought about her mother waiting at home. Tomorrow, she would tell her mother about this incredible night. She would tell her about the scholarship opportunities, the job offers, and all the people who had shown her kindness. Most importantly, Sarah realized that she had learned something valuable about herself. She had almost given up on her dreams, thinking that circumstances had made them impossible. But tonight had shown her that dreams do not die easily. Sometimes they just wait for the right moment to come back to life. When Sarah finally left Romano's that night, she carried with her not just the $500 from Marcus's bet, but something much more valuable. She carried hope, opportunity, and the knowledge that her talent had the power to touch people's hearts and change lives, including her own. The piano at Romano's would never be just decoration again. It had found its voice through Sarah's hands, and it would continue to sing for as long as Sarah was there to play it. And Sarah would be there because she had finally come home to the music that had always been her true calling.